All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. It is your favorite Jackson, the good Jackson, not the bad Jackson, not Charles Jackson. And joining me today is my host and co-host, Peter of Gonna Go For It fame. Welcome back.
Hello, and a
How are you
happy new
doing?
year to all of the viewers of the channel.
Yes, Happy New Year to you. Also,
So
I
did
don't I don't know if we said Happy New Year to each other.
no, we didn't. Happy New Year, Jackson.
Well, Happy New Year. Here we
We,
are.
we
Happy New
did
Year.
we did
Yes.
in DMs, but not in
Oh,
voice.
I guess that's fair. Let's see. This is 2025, and this channel started in August of 2016. Isn't that wacky? So
That's
we're approaching 9 years. Can you believe that? We just crossed 8 years.
yeah. It's
Just crossed 8 years of this channel.
the fact that we've been arguing the same thing over and over and over and over for 9 years.
Right, we really
Mm.
have. That's I mean a large part of why I think I want to take this channel in a different direction, or in some different directions, I guess. Once we finish the Ancestor's Tale, because then we'll do a series on another book that's on climate change denial. So we'll tear that one apart, and then still deciding what to do after that. So we'll figure it
The,
out once we get there, right?
The sad thing is, though, that it is still needed. I mean, I've been thinking about this the
Yeah.
last couple of days. It is trying to convince people that the stork theory of birth isn't reliable and that we should go with the natural cause on why babies get born. The fact that we're still arguing something that is quite similar to that because there's no evidence or creation or an intelligent designer or
And
any.
Peter, I really honestly wish that creationism and intelligent design were the only or the most prevalent pseudosciences in society right now. I really, honest to God, wish they were, because anti-vax, distrust of the germ theory of disease, these are making comebacks.
Mhm.
Um, we're
on
returning to
on
peasant brain apparently.
on the
So
upside, Jeranism is no longer a flat earther after having seen the 24-hour sun in Antarctica. So
wait,
hmm,
really?
yes, he has made a post that he is no longer a flat earther because obviously what he saw couldn't happen.
That is fascinating to me, because I would see at that point, I would think it's the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like he's sunk too much money and
Mm-hmm.
time and effort into into being a flat earther, that I would never think that he would change his mind, because I mean that's why his channel's as popular as it is, right? So I get the views he does. But you know what he could do? He could pivot now and attack flat earthers as a reformed, as a convert or whatever, and he can make lots of views that way. So I mean, I guess it works out
Yes.
either way, I suppose. So there's that aspect to it, but it is really disturbing to me how dangerous the pseudoscientific rhetoric has gotten in recent months. It's not just that we have an anti-vaxxer, someone who categorically denies the efficacy of vaccines, who is about to become the head of Health and Human Services here in the United States. It'd be Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
and and
He's
another one
directly
and another one who becomes head of everything basically in the US. I
Yes.
mean,
Well, I was going to get to him. Yes, yes. But RFK is directly responsible for the deaths of like what 80 people in Samoa. He went there, told them not to take the measles vaccine, and then 80 people died immediately thereafter during a measles outbreak. In
hmm.
my own state, my governor is friends with RFK. Hold on, it's not just him. It's hold on a second. Let me find it. Our governor, so that's Jeff Landry, is our governor. So he, of course, Republican, is friends with RFK. Jeff Landry is a is an anti-vaxxer, and he put in charge of our health department 2 more anti-vaxxers. So our health department, our public health department here in Louisiana, health administration, whatever you want to call it, is full of anti-vaxxers. Also, there was in the news recently, Louisiana. Hold on, I said Louisiana vaccine. What was it? Louisiana vaccine. Let's just do that. Here it is. As of not a couple weeks ago, Louisiana forbids public health workers from promoting COVID, flu, and the monkeypox shots. So public health workers in Louisiana can no longer promote vaccines. So that's cool. You
Oh
can,
man.
of course, still get vaccines from from hospitals and everything like that. It's just that public health workers cannot promote vaccines. You have to basically ask them for vaccines, which is scary stuff. Because
Insane.
yeah, it's insane. This is going to get people killed, specifically older people, because COVID has a 1% mortality rate. So that means 1 in every 100 people is going to die who gets COVID. We had, what was it? I think there were 7 million COVID. Sorry, hold on. Well, how many people died in the U.S. from COVID? I'm trying to let me not. Sorry, let me not. How many COVID deaths USA? Hold on. Sorry, there were 1 million COVID deaths in the US. How many COVID deaths worldwide? And there were 7 million deaths worldwide. That's what it was. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so there were 1 million deaths from the US alone from COVID. 7 million deaths worldwide. So that means that the United States alone accounted for what?
One
It
seventh.
accounted about 14% of all
Yeah.
deaths from COVID worldwide, despite the fact that our population only accounts for, let's see, what is that, 0.3? It's like 380, isn't it? Let's say 0.38 divided by how many people are in the world? What's the world population?
I think we passed the 8 billion.
8 billion? Okay, so let's say so despite the fact that we account for only about almost 5% of the world's population, we accounted for 14% of the deaths from COVID. So a disproportionate amount of the deaths from COVID came from the United States alone. And it's cool that in the aftermath of that, we have an administration that is now pushing to reduce the prevalence of vaccines. So a lot of people are going to die from this. A lot of people. It might not be me because I'm a younger person. I'm not, in the most amazing health in the world, of course, but I am a younger person that tends to help with when you get sick. But older people, my parents, my grandparents, they are very much more at risk from diseases than I am. And so the people, and what's ironic, of course, is the people who are anti-vax tend to be older people, the
Mm-hmm.
people who are the most at risk from these diseases that can potentially kill them. And so that's very scary.
Well,
So
I mean, Jackson, on the upside, you're going to at least increase the population once you've annexed Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal.
right,
I mean,
right.
that's a few million more people, right?
True. Yeah. So the way that a lot of, is that my end? Never
Okay.
mind. Um I hear a beeping noise.
Yeah, me too. That is on your end. When you take off
Okay.
your
Well, anyway,
headphones, it stops beeping, which is weird.
that might have been the fire alarm next door. Anyway, so
That might have
the
been the
people who
fire
are
alarm next door, says Jackson, and just casually continues with the show.
So the people who are most likely to be to die from not taking vaccines are the ones who are predominantly holding anti-vax rhetoric, which of course is very scary because, I mean, they're going to kill they're going to get other people who are their age killed, and I mean, of course, infants are also at risk, so that means a lot of babies are also going to die because they don't have the immune system yet to tango with these diseases. So yes, a lot of babies will also
But
die.
Jackson,
So.
those are babies that got born. They weren't killed before they were born. There's a difference.
I
I'm
mean, I
not
suppose that's
sure what
true.
the difference is, but apparently there's a difference.
Yeah. So we're living in scary times, and of course, the idiot in chief is. I don't know if I don't think Trump is an anti-vaxxer. He is old enough to have lived, I believe. Yeah, no, he's old enough to have seen the polio vaccine. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's an anti-vaxxer. I think he probably just keeps RFK around because RFK sucks up to him, which is what Trump does. Trump's an egomaniac. He doesn't really hold a lot of very strong um, political beliefs. He holds, or his political belief is primarily people who suck up to him should be around him because that's what he likes hearing. So, but you know,
In
he's
in all fairness, what Trump really thinks is a mystery because he will just parrot whatever his stupid followers want to hear. So if his followers are anti-vax, then he will promote the same thing because he wants to be popular. And yeah, if they
right.
die, then they just die. I mean,
Yeah, Triceratops says you should just click harder. Says Trump is an opportunist. I agree. I think that's
mm-hmm.
true. He is really just siphoning off the likes from his followers because you know that's what he does. He's an egomaniac. He of course spreads lies about immigrants. And we talked about that in the Grasshopper's Tale. Him and his vice president J.D. Vance, or vice president elect. They both spread harmful rhetoric about immigrants and immigration, just factually false information about them. I think Trump thinks that the term someone seeking asylum means that they're coming from an asylum if they're an asylum seeker, which I mean is on the level of his misunderstanding of how tariffs work because
Mm-hmm.
it likes to say we're going to punish China with tariffs, not realizing that our people are the ones who pay for the tariffs. It's not the Chinese
Yes.
who pay for the tariffs.
No.
Um, and so and so what's the most unfortunate about this is despite the fact that our previous administration here in the US, or the current one, I guess, despite the fact that this administration, the Biden administration, was decent, it was decent, they did fine. Um, Trump and his cronies um, made a good narrative for Trump. The establishment legacy media did not really help Biden out in all this time, despite all the good stuff that he's done: the bipartisan
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure bill, the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act. All these things are great. CHIPS Act, that's another one. All these things are great, and what's so sad about it is he got like no credit for it. He gets no credit for any of these things. Meanwhile, Trump does windfall tax cuts, what, Jesus Christ, 8 years ago, and he still takes credit for that, and no one is patting Biden on the back for for any of the things that he did. It's really sad. It is quite sad. It makes sense then um why the average person can't really name anything that Biden did and thinks that Trump would be a good leader again, despite the fact that we already went through his craziness beforehand. It's
Yeah.
really a quite sad situation. Um, so yeah, it's very
RJ
bad.
put in the chat, Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of politics. I I I'm almost inclined to think that should be an insult to Kent Hovind. I'm
Yeah,
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 and I'm
it's pretty
struggling to
bad.
find what good thing there is about Kent Hope, and I can't seem to think of anything. So maybe he's
Yeah, he
right.
really doesn't have any redeeming qualities. He's a a serial wife abuser. He's an anti-vaxxer. He's an idiot in general. So nothing good really.
No.
Um, but anyway, so yeah, so Trump also, um, eh, so well, let me rephrase. So in essence, the United States has, with this previous election, we have legitimized all of the lies, all of the insanity that Trump comes with, because he has just now won a second term as our president, despite the fact that he really didn't do anything really the first time, other than lie and foment fear and mistrust of outsiders, of immigrants. And that's all he's done for the past 4 years, and that's all he's going to do for the next 4 years. We can hope that his next term is also as what's a good word for it? Lazy. His next term is as lazy, gets as little as few things accomplished. But I'm not as optimistic because the Republicans control uh, all three aspects
The
of our government
the
right now.
the
So,
thing that
well, four really, and
the
the
thing that
Supreme
I'm
Court,
afraid of
both houses of
is
Congress, and the president.
the thing that I'm afraid of is the end of this 4-year term. What's going to happen then?
Yeah,
We
yeah, it
saw
is scary.
we saw what happened last time. Before he got elected, he said, "This will be the last time you need to vote. After then, you'll never have to vote again."
He did say that, yes, and that's also quite scary. It is also very
Mm.
funny to me that um, I think he said in that same speech that he's not a Christian, despite in his first term he was trying so hard to pretend to be one. He held the Bible upside down and everything. Um,
I have played that clip on a Christian channel, and they told me that is not what he said.
okay, well,
I'm not kidding.
I mean, he's. He literally said, "I'm not a Christian, but I like Christians," and I mean that's what he said, So it's and there's nothing wrong with the funny thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with not being a Christian, obviously. Look at us, but like, could our first non-religious president not be Donald Trump, please? That would be nice. That's like we don't take credit for him.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so with that, so all right, so all of that down. So pseudoscience is real bad. It's in control of our country, and so we're going to continue on this channel, trucking along, fighting pseudoscience the best we can, and we're going to do that today by continuing with the Stephen Meyer video, in which he talks about his newest book, which I think came out in 2019. I think it's titled "The Return of the God Hypothesis." It's basically the culmination of his books over the last 20 years. He's written Signature in the Cell. He's written Darwin's Doubt, and I think those are the only books he's written. But he's taking those plus the other works that he's done with the Discovery Institute, and he's put them into a book. And I think he's in charge of the Discovery Institute now. And so now he's giving this talk at Cambridge about how all the evidence for the existence of God has come in. And so I guess we're going to
One thing, and
continue with that.
I hadn't looked at the title of the video before I downloaded it and put it in, and I just click on the link, download the video, and put it in OBS. The return of the God hypothesis, has it been away? How long has it been away? Have people
so
really?
his argument is that like science became secular because of like Darwin, and everybody became an atheist, but now the evidence for God is back, or is here, I guess, and so now everyone's going to be Christian any minute now, any second. Everyone's about to become Christian again.
Can I
And
make a
realize that
prediction?
evolution's fake.
Can I make a prediction? He's not going to supply us with any evidence of God in the entire video.
So far, his argument has been you can be a scientist and believe in God, which obviously, like, we've not only has anyone ever disputed that, we routinely point to that fact to argue against intelligent design proponents and creationists, because they like to say that you can only accept evolution if you're an atheist. They like to say that. And so now he turns around, they only want to claim the Christian scientists when it's convenient for their narrative. They don't want to claim them when, like, Mary Schweitzer or Robert Bacher or Francis Collins, or, oh God, they hate Francis Collins right now because of the whole vaccine thing. But of course they don't want to, claim him or any of them because, like, oh, they are dirty compromisers. They accept evolution. But now he's giving a talk about how, presumably to an audience of creationists, because he's going to talk about why evolution is false. He's already kind of alluded to it, to like Darwin has, been this problem for the scientific community. So he must be talking to an audience of people who just, hate evolution. So.
Yeah, it's weird that no one stands up and asks questions about this, because,
well, I'm sure they'll save that for the end. He'll take some questions from the audience at the end.
I did rewind it just a few seconds, because he made a statement that is necessary to know from the point where we actually should start. So it kind of makes sense. So.
Okay. All right. Well,
we did reply to the first 30 seconds that are now upcoming. So.
Okay. Gotcha. So we'll just let it play for.
Okay.
Right, gotcha. Okay.
You want to start? Okay.
Yeah, let's do.
That biology is the study of complicated things.
I can't hear it.
That give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose.
Nope.
Where the key word is.
Hold on. You can't hear it?
I cannot hear it.
Let me see. I thought I fixed this last week. So.
Triceratops, we should go back in time and cancel Celebrity Apprentice. True.
This is. Hold on.
Brian says it's 5x5 here. I assume that means it's working?
Yes.
Okay.
So, according to StreamYard and to OBS, the sound should be going to you.
Well, here, play again.
Let me try again.
Appearance, the illusion.
Oh, there it is.
Why is it an illusion? Because there's this unguided, undirected process called natural selection that can produce the appearance of design without being guided or directed in any way. It can mimic, it's often said, the powers of a designing intelligence, but it's not intelligent. There's no intelligence allowed. And so this perspective has given rise to a lot of intellectually fulfilled atheists. And many of them are kind of very popular, and they've had a very strong voice in the culture. Lawrence Krauss. Unfortunately, even Stephen Hawking got into this act late in his life. Bill Nye, the science guy, even though he's not a scientist. And
he doesn't call himself a scientist.
The really great physicist, Steven Weinberg, have all been exponents of this idea of scientific materialism or scientific atheism. And Richard Dawkins had a lovely way of framing this, even if he got, in my view, the issue wrong. He says, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If at bottom there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Blind, pitiless indifference for him is kind of shorthand for an unguided, undirected process, materialism. Matter and energy are eternal and self-existent and self-organizing, and they can generate all the intricate designs we see in the universe without there being a guiding hand behind it. This is the Darwinian and scientific materialist perspective. Now,
I love how many things he's just rolling into one there. It's materialism, Darwinism, atheism.
At least 3 major discoveries that are not what you would expect if the universe were the product of blind, pitiless indifference. Dawkins says that the universe has exactly the properties we should expect if it was only materialistic processes at work, but there have been 3 major discoveries, and I've written about them in my book, Return of the God Hypothesis. What I'm going to do today, and which is kind of fun, is to highlight the Cambridge angle on each of these discoveries. because it's non-trivial in each case. If you read some of my work, or if you've heard one of my talks, I won't belabor all the things I usually talk about, but you probably remember I've talked about Edwin Hubble, with the astronomer, the lawyer who went into astronomy in the 1920s. He began to use these, at the same time as he went into astronomy, they were building these great dome telescopes. And as a result of the one in Southern California at Mount Wilson, he was able for the first time to verify that the nebular smudges that the nebular structures in the atmosphere were actually galaxies beyond our Milky Way. And further, he was able to show that those galaxies are racing away from our Milky Way galaxy, and they're doing it in every quadrant of the night sky. And so he was able to show that the further out you look, the faster those galaxies are moving away. And the best explanation of this idea of an expansion, where the things further out are moving faster out and the things closer in are moving a little less fast, was a kind of
it's proportional,
spherical expansion, like a balloon being blown up. How many people have seen me illustrate this with just puffing on the balloon? Is this okay? So if you just think of I've got one, but I don't want to belabor illustrations that people have seen 100 times. But if you just think of a balloon blowing up, and you think of I usually draw galaxies on the surface, and as the universe is going in the forward direction of time, the universe is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The volume of the universe is getting bigger. It's like a balloon expanding. And what Hubble realized.
There's a better analogy, I think, for that, and that's one that I at least use often. It's if you have bread with currents in it. So if you have the currents in the dough, and it rises, the currents don't move, but yet they get further away from each other, and the ones in the center get away slower than the ones on the outside, which is also
that's the analogy I used in my the physics class I taught.
Yeah. Also, if this is intelligently designed, then why is God afraid that we're going to go to another planet? So he has to get them the hell out of the way. Why? What's the idea behind the expansion? If you have a God hypothesis, then what is the reason for God to let it expand, and then ultimately we get a heat death that kills everything, all life on any given planet? What's the great idea?
Well, what you have to remember about this is that all the discoveries that Meyer's going to mention, none of them, not a single one of them, was predicted by intelligent design hypothesis, right? Or creationism. None of them. Now, what he would argue is they can all be accommodated into intelligent design hypothesis, which I'm sure they can. Intelligent design can accommodate literally anything. That's why it's not a falsifiable hypothesis. There's nothing that can't be accommodated into the hypothesis. But all these ideas were accommodated. So, the stuff, the work that Hubble did, realizing that, that the Hubble's law, the stuff that, Penzias and Wilson did, where they figured out that there's the cosmic microwave background radiation, is it Arnold? Penzias and Wilson, right? Yeah. And the stuff that, like, all the research that these physicists did to figure out that the universe is expanding, and therefore, and also Einstein's general theory of relativity features into that too, because either the universe must be contracting or it must be expanding. So none of these researchers, none of these physicists used any version of creationism or intelligent design to predict that the universe started at a particular time in the past, and specifically, like, what is it, around like 13.8 billion years ago? Nobody in intelligent design, nobody on Meyer's side of the ideological divide made this prediction in any meaningful sense either. There's no like scientific viability to any of these ideas. Now, he might say, oh, well, the Bible says that, in the beginning there, God created the heavens and the earth, and that's fine. But it also says God was hovering over the Earth, and it was formless and void, right? So that doesn't really seem to imply that the universe existed in that moment. That seems to imply that there was something beforehand, and then God restructured it into the universe as we know it now. And like either way, like this, none of them made any real scientific predictions about anything in the universe with this information, right? They're just taking the stuff physicists did and they're accommodating it into their worldview. They're saying, oh, well, the physicists say the universe had a beginning, which we agree with, so we're going to take that in. And when it happened, who really cares? But it happened in the past, and we like that. And so,
yeah, the sad thing is, though,
Mhm.
that physicists now say that the universe did not have a beginning, and now they're going to have problems with them.
Right. Well, so that's
all
the thing,
those
right?
people they tend to agree with before.
Right. So right now, as I understand it, not being a non-physics person, the idea is it is best to be agnostic on whether or not the universe had an origin. All we can know as of right now is that there was a point where there was the universe expanded from a very dense, very hot state. That's all we can say. We can't know right now what happened before that. We just can't know. It could be the case that was the beginning of the universe. It could be the case that it wasn't. Maybe the universe is infinitely old. Maybe universes spontaneously come into existence from nothingness all the time, as Lawrence Krauss proposes. That's possible. These are all possibilities. We just don't know which is true. We can't know right now. We don't have there's no theory of everything.
But
So we can't know.
even Lawrence Krauss doesn't think that a universe came from nothing, which becomes
Well,
clear if you either read the book or I did he.
Well, the nothing itself is unstable, right? There are always like virtual particles that come into existence, then cancel each other out. And our universe has a total energy balance of 0, which means that it requires 0 energy to come into existence, so on and so on. Which again, these are all things that can be accommodated into Meyer's philosophy, but his philosophy did not predict any of these things. So taking them and saying, "Oh, this supports me," doesn't do anything really to help his case. You could say it's true with either of them. Really, the only thing you can say,
the whole Big Bang idea isn't that old yet, and yet before our Belgian priest, and I'm blanking on his name.
Georges Lemaitre.
Oh yeah, Lemaitre. Before he came up with that, we didn't hear Christian apologists say the planets are getting away from us because that's what it says in the Bible. God is stretching things out. They didn't. They were fixed in place because he had stretched out the universe as a tent. And once you stretch it out, it's fixed.
Right. Yeah, nobody in the thousands of years prior to the advent of the Big Bang model in the early 1900s, nobody was out there arguing for an expanding universe.
No,
nobody was. And so, this come on, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway, all right, we keep going. I think we belabored the point.
Is that his observations meant that we had an expanding universe, but if you wind the clock backwards in time, that expanding balloon would have been smaller and smaller and smaller at each successive point in the past, till eventually all that matter would have had to have been in the reverse direction of time. It would have congealed to a starting point, marking the beginning of the expansion of the universe, but also arguably the beginning of the universe itself. Now, this was a discovery that was made mainly in the United States by Hubble, another colleague of his, Humason, an earlier U.S. astronomer named Vestos Leifer. But there was another angle on this that was really interesting, and
I have to go back. I do think his balloon thing is a good thing to know, because if you blow up a balloon, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you go back in time, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you end up with a balloon. Not nothing. There's still a balloon, isn't there, before you blow it up?
It's just an analogy.
Yeah, but I mean, this is
Analogies are intentionally, problematic.
but this is the thing. It's an analogy, but it when you talk to creationists is a lot more than an analogy, because that is how they imagine that it works.
Well, sure, but I mean, the universe isn't raisin bread either. The fact that, I mean, that's why, as you know, as you well know, watching me do debates for 8 years now, I
Mhm.
really don't like using analogies simply because it
They're
it
always
causes
flawed.
creationists to miss the point. Yeah,
Yes.
they're always flawed. The creation is always going to miss the point. They're going to try to attack the analogy and not
Yes.
understand the argument, and that's why I just try to avoid analogies in general. I understand what he's doing with the balloon thing, but what he did say, he said arguably the origin of the universe. That's not what physicists say. Physicists say you should be agnostic as to the origin of the universe. All we can say right now is that the Big Bang was the origin of expansion, not the origin of the universe. If I'm wrong on that, please somebody call me out. But I believe that is the case, right?
Mhm.
I believe so. Okay, we can keep going.
It was a consequence of the work of a German scientist with very bad hair, with a very thick accent, who typically did not match his socks, and was therefore a hero of mine. This is Albert Einstein. And John is going to give a little test on this equation afterwards, so don't worry, you don't have to take it down now. But he had this new theory of gravity, and it was slightly different than Newton's, and it was the idea that gravitational force is caused as massive bodies curve the fabric of space-time. Now, this is no less mysterious than Newton's theory, because how does matter curve space? And then the other part of the theory was the curvature of space causes the matter, the other matter, to move and take curved trajectories. But since space is empty, it's no less mysterious than Newton's theory, but it kind of worked. The math was better. But it also had an implication. You could think of it as like putting a bowling ball in a trampoline, how it will create a divot, right? It curves, it creates a contour in the trampoline. Well, that was the idea, that the massive bodies would create a kind of contour in space. And, but if that was true, Einstein realized that if gravity, if his idea about gravity was true, and it was the only force operating in the universe, then eventually all the balls would come to the center, okay? And all the matter would congeal. And there would be no empty space in the universe. We'd just be in one giant black hole. But we don't live in that kind of universe. We live in a universe where there's empty space. And so he thought there must be some other kind of force at work that's doing some pushings, an outward pushing force that counteracts the theory of gravity. And he called that idea the cosmological constant. And then he made one other move that was completely arbitrary. He assigned a precise value to that outward pushing force that was equal and opposite to the inward pulling force. So he could depict the universe as being completely static, not expanding outward from a beginning and not collapsing backwards either.
Okay,
and the reason that he chose that value.
Okay, he chose that value because they didn't know any better at the time. Is he going to say, "Oh, because you had this presuppositional bias"? Like, no, that's just what they thought. They were wrong. I mean, he had a hypothesis. It turned out to be wrong, and as all good scientists do, he changed the math when better data came in. Like, that's how science works. That's why we like science, because it changes when you realize it was wrong in the past. Just
That's
I don't know.
that's
I
why
guarantee you,
ID
he's gonna say, like,
proponents. That's why ID proponents and creationists always refer to very old scientific facts or discoveries.
oh, right. Is he gonna say? I bet you he's gonna say. This is my prediction. My gold standard scientific evolutionist prediction. He's gonna say he was biased towards believing that the universe was static. So I think he's gonna say.
Let's see.
Was that he found the idea of a beginning to the universe rather distasteful. It kind of triggered him. He thought, if there's a beginning, then what comes before that? That sounded like the Genesis account, And at this point in his career, he was a pretty staunch scientific materialist. And so he sort of inserted this fudge factor into his
Actually, can you pause for a
equations.
moment?
And
Now, Meyer is a philosopher, by the way. That's his background. He has a doctorate in philosophy of science, which I know is one particular branch of philosophy. I understand that. But as a philosopher, right, he has to know that atheism is not materialism. These are not equivalent philosophies. These don't mean the same thing, right? Materialism is one type of philosophy that an atheist could hold. It's really frustrating that it's his background. He does philosophy as his background, and he is taking these terms that don't mean the same thing and is conflating them. And obviously it's dishonest, and he knows that, but it's just really frustrating. So anyway, sorry, that was it.
it preserved for the time being the idea of a static universe, not one expanding outward from a beginning. Well, meanwhile, there was a young Belgian priest who started to work with Einstein's equations, and he was working here in 1923 at St. Edmund's College. He was Belgian. He did most of his scientific career across the channel, but he had a really crucial year here where he was working on what are called the field equations, Einstein's field equations. And he showed that Einstein's idea of precisely balancing the outward push to the inward pull didn't ensure that the universe would be static, because even the slight alteration, perturbation in the distribution of matter and energy in the universe would throw that balance off and cause everything to go into a black hole or into a heat death. And so,
which is going to anyway.
At a physics conference in 1927, Lemaitre meets Einstein, and they're in a taxi cab together going to the conference, and he confronts him with this. And Einstein, of course, doesn't like it too well and tells Lemaitre, he says, well, your mathematics is admirable, but your physical intuition is abominable. And the scientists are always so measured in the way they speak, and so there was this, Einstein basically, I don't like
Pause
it.
for a second.
Your math is right.
I'm sorry. This is that coming from Meyer is the irony of ironies, because this is the same guy who's been complaining for 20 years now about the Dover trial. I'm like, world's tiniest violin, Meyer. Get over yourself. Anyway, okay, we can keep going.
This idea of precisely balancing things is unstable, but I just don't like where this leads as far as a physics theory of the origin of the universe. We're back to a beginning, and that sounds like the Genesis text. Well, there are other scientists who didn't like this idea as well, the idea that the universe had a beginning, and one was Sir Arthur Eddington, who was also here in Cambridge. And he was famously quoted as saying, philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. I simply do not believe the present order of things started off with a bang. The expanding universe, outward from a beginning, the expanding universe is preposterous. It leaves me cold. Well, this alternate theory in psychology is known as denial. And you see,
pause for a moment. Sorry. Again, remember that nobody in Meyer's camp predicted the origin of an origin of the universe in the way that the universe actually exists. The idea was the Earth formed a few thousand years ago. God snapped his fingers in a few consecutive days and created everything like that. We know that that's nowhere near how that happened. We don't actually know if the universe ever had a beginning. We know it had an origin of expansion, and we know that life has been around for about 4 billion years, and our Earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years. Peter, does any of that sound like the Genesis text to you? Any part of that?
Yeah, it does. I'm slightly.
Oh, it does. Okay.
I'm slightly distracted because we have someone in the chat
Is it Otangelo again?
No, this is someone called J Edition. I don't know what.
That's not Otangelo?
I don't know. It doesn't look like Ochangelo, but yeah, he's right about one thing though, and that is that I do need God. I need him to show up for once. So ask him to email me, call me, text me. I don't have WhatsApp though, but there's several ways to get in touch. Have him get in touch. I'll have him on the show.
Peter, I do have to say that I clicked on his channel, and as a bi-man, it always brings me great joy to see a naked guy as the first thing. You know, he's quite a sculpted abs here. Did you click on his channel?
No. Now I need to.
I think you should.
No, I need to.
Get six-pack ads in just, I think that should be abs, in just 30 days / secret ways. Okay.
Well, you could just it could just be ads, because I get six-pack ads all the time. I see those in my spam folder. So
okay. Well,
I mean, could be just ads.
Ads. Listen, I are all of his videos? Is it just the first one? Okay, it might just be the first one. Okay.
Yeah, the first video he posted was of a half-naked man. Yeah.
Listen, Jay Edition, if you want to come on, we're happy to have you. We will talk half-naked men with you, or creationism, whatever floats your boat.
His channel, oddly, is almost in line with the Bible, because that started out with a completely naked man. But we won't go there.
I guess that's true.
So.
Okay, anyway, all right, we can continue.
By the way, I do have to apologize that if you hear squeaking noises in the background, that's coming from me. I have found the world's first nocturnal parrot. It is a green-cheeked conure, and it is in my room. It starts making sounds in the middle of the night. He becomes active.
Aren't kakapos nocturnal?
Just after midnight, he becomes active.
I think, Peter, you might have the second known species of nocturnal parrot, because the kakapo is also nocturnal.
Ah, so maybe he's
although there aren't too many of them left, so you know.
Well, I mean,
so you might have the only one soon enough.
Yes. Well, he has settled down. He is looking at me now. What? Peep. Say peep. Let the people hear you. No? Peep. There you go. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, now it's enough.
Can you see what the evidence is that he's citing? Why he doesn't like it? He says, philosophically, I don't like it. It's challenging his worldview. It's challenging scientific materialism. Now, to his credit, Eddington has a meeting with Einstein here.
Hashtag irony.
And he doesn't like the idea, but he tells Einstein, hey, look, we got to get with the program, and you got to get with the program, because out in California, at the Mount Wilson Observatory, they're seeing the evidence of this expansion. And so Eddington, despite his own personal reservations and distaste for what later became known as the Big Bang Theory, tells Einstein he needs to go meet Hubble. And so Einstein does subsequently go out to Pasadena, to the Mount Wilson Observatory, 1931.
I have to break it. So, what are evidence that what you're living for is reliable? Is that an honest question, J Edition? Because you need to come on my show and just explain what that question means. I'm sorry, but I had to. I mean, English isn't my first language, it's my third language, but even I can't make sense of any of that. Sorry. By the way, though, 3 subscribers, 3 subscribers for 6 videos. That's half a subscriber per video. I mean,
Peter, you reminded me of a meme I saw that was something to the effect of it's like it says like I speak English because what is it? Or you speak English because it's the only language you know. I speak English because it's the only language you know.
Hmm.
Have you seen that one? That that one makes me laugh every time I see it. Uh, I'm sorry. Anyway, okay, we can keep going. I
Yeah,
just, what do you call someone who speaks only one language? American. So,
American. Yeah, I
Mhm.
made a meme for someone in Louisiana who used to say that on Twitter. If you can speak two languages, you're bilingual. If you can speak one language, you're an American.
Right. Yeah. I
And
do appreciate that joke. It is quite good.
I wish this person was still on social media because he was a comedian and he was very good at it too. But yeah. Oh well. Soon no one will be on Twitter anymore, which is a good thing.
I'm really
Fascinating.
not on Twitter that much. If people want to contact me, feel free to reach out to me at Blue Sky now. That's predominantly where I am. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Same
Anyway.
and same hashtag, same at as it
Yep.
used to be on Twitter.
Newsreel footage we have of this encounter, moving pictures, and Einstein goes into the telescope. He takes a peek, and then 2 weeks later, this is Hubble in the background with a pipe, and 2 weeks later, he does an interview with the New York Times, and admits that the universe is not static. And then he says the three hardest words to say in the English language: "I was wrong." Okay. And he
I disagree because it's I am sorry, which are the hardest words. But
That's probably true. Yeah.
both of them apply to Stephen Meyer. First, he needs to say I was wrong, and then he needs to say I was sorry. I'm sorry.
later, to his credit, I mean, he said that his fine-tuning of the cosmological constant to obscure the evidence for the beginning of the universe was the greatest blunder. In my book, I said it was the greatest blunder of his
Really?
career. I misquoted him. It was stronger. He said it was the greatest blunder of my life. Okay, he let his philosophical predilections distort his evaluation of the evidence. Now,
No,
this whole issue of the beginning resurfaced again, and it did so here in Cambridge. In the 1960s, Stephen Hawking, while doing a PhD, began to think about Einstein's theory. He was doing black hole physics. And he began to think more about this idea of general relativity and how massive bodies curve space. And he was thinking, well, in the forward direction, and by this time he was also aware of what the observational astronomers were discovering about the universe expanding outward in the forward direction of time. And he realized if that was true, then the mass of the universe would be getting more and more and more diffuse. And if the mass of the universe is more diffuse, then since concentrated matter curves space, then the curvature of the universe should be getting less and less pronounced. But by the same token, he realized if you back extrapolate and go in the reverse direction of time, the matter would be getting more and more and more densely concentrated as you go further and further and further back in time. But if the matter is getting more densely concentrated, then the space would be getting more tightly curved, and then more tightly curved, and then more tightly curved, and finally you would reach a limiting case where you couldn't go back any further because the curvature, the matter would go to an infinite density and the curvature would become infinitely tight. Well, an infinitely tight curvature corresponds to zero spatial volume.
Hey, Peter, pause for a second. I think... No, never mind. I'm sorry. I'm very immature. He kept saying an infinitely tight curvature. That made me... I'm sorry. We can keep going. I had a thought. I'm not brave enough to say it anymore.
You remind me of a reply that I gave to Elon Musk. He said that brain capacity was limited because of the birth canal, and I replied, "Your mom must have been tight." So
that's pretty good. Uh,
Never
oh my
mind.
goodness.
Let's continue.
We're we have to continue.
Question, how much stuff can you put in no space? No thing fits in no space, okay? And so this is a profoundly anti-materialistic consequence of modern physics. In fact, it ends the picture of the universe that's painted by this idea. Hawking eventually proves this, and is part of his 1966 PhD dissertation. But a consequence is that the universe is then portrayed in terms that are very similar to what the medieval theologians described as creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing physical, because there's no space to put anything. And if you've seen the little...
That's an incorrect translation, by the way. Creation ex nihilo does not mean out of nothing physical. It means out of nothing. Period. Not nothing physical.
It's also really frustrating again that what Meyer is doing is very sleight of hand. He's again doing some accommodation. He's accommodating the Big Bang into his idea of how the world works. He again, if Meyer lived in the early 1900s, even before we had any evidence for the expansion of the universe, he would still believe that the universe had a beginning, because that's his bias, right?
Yes.
That's what he thinks. He is opposed to any conclusions that disagree with him, right? That's because he's biased. He's an intelligent design proponent. He thinks evolution isn't true because it goes against his worldview. It goes against his particular philosophy of the world, not because there's not evidence for evolution. And so he's accommodating the things that he agrees with, and he happens to think that the Earth is old. I mean, young Earth creationists also like pulling in the evidence that the universe had a beginning. They just don't agree that the universe is old. So, like, this idea can really, again, can go either way. He's just accommodating. There were no predictions being made. So, anyway.
And I'm still hoping that at some point in all this rambling about things that we already know and things that he misinterprets sometimes, if we get to the point where a disembodied mind, how it creates things and how it interacts with the material world, because that's the part that I'm interested in. I mean,
Yep.
how does this God do anything? So
That's a good question. I have no idea.
My prediction is he's not going to talk about that.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Yes.
Little film, A Theory of Everything, about Hawking's life. They depict his PhD dissertation. And he's standing at a wooden table across from Roger Penrose and Dennis Sciama and these very prominent, established Cambridge and Oxford physicists. And they're picking this poor thesis apart in chapter 1, and he's got an error in a derivation in chapter 2, he's got spelling errors in chapter 4. But then they say, but Stephen, this third chapter, this is a black hole at the beginning of time, a space-time singularity. This is genius. And then they shove the book across the table and say, congratulations, Dr. Hawking. And they use the title, he's passed. It's a really dramatic thing. In any case, this kind of really, really focuses people's attention on the consequences of this idea of the Big Bang. That is, we're not talking about a primeval atom that's been sitting around forever waiting to explode. We're talking about the origin of matter, space, time, and energy itself. And in 1985, I attended a conference in Dallas that completely changed my life. It was a conference of atheists and theistic scientists debating the origin of the universe and the origin of life. And in the first session, one of Edwin Hubble's former PhD students, by this time a very prominent astrophysicist himself, Alan Sandage, a well-known Jewish agnostic who was pretty much a scientific materialism, ascended to the podium and sat on the wrong side. He sat down.
And that agnostic who was pretty much as scientific materialism. A person is a
Hmm.
scientific materialism.
He is the scientific materialism, the like
You learn new
the
things every
progenitor
day. Yeah, you learn new things
of
every
scientific
day.
materialism.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I get it that he likes it that they were debating it. Because guess what doesn't happen in science? Debates to figure out what is and what isn't true. It's a scientific paper that then gets fact checked by your peers. That is how we determine whether something.
Right.
It's not a
Right.
debate. I have
Right.
this idea and my idea is better than your idea, and we can talk about this in a room and have a jury decide which of us won the debate. That's not how this works.
Right. There's no use in bringing philosophy in to discuss scientific arguments, right? The whether or not the
Not
universe is infinitely old or existed for a certain amount of time in the past, that's going to be decided by observations we make about the natural world.
Mhm.
Has nothing whatsoever to do with whether or not God exists, has nothing whatsoever to do with anything, with any religious textbooks or anything like that. Nothing at all. Um, so yeah, it's kind of weird. I have no idea about any of the actual facts of this thing, so I have no idea if Meyer's representing any of this correctly. I don't know. Frankly, I don't really care. The point is simply a conference like this wouldn't or doesn't decide anything. It's
No,
just a place for people to go and talk, right? Like if they had papers, if any of these researchers had papers that they that detailed lines of evidence in support of one hypothesis or another, then they would publish them in the relevant journals. If they
yes.
didn't, then it's not science. It's not a scientific work, and what's the point?
If
So
if
I
they
just
didn't
I don't.
if they didn't, Jackson, they would publish it in other journals.
Yeah,
Like
they're publishing Nautangelo's pay to play journal.
yes, yes, journal like that.
With the theists instead of his fellow materialists. And in his talk, he then explained how the evidence from his own field that he had helped verify, he had helped Hubble verify that the universe was expanding in every quadrant of the night sky.
Uh-huh.
And he announced that he had become not just only a theist, but a Christian. And he had done so not in spite of the scientific evidence, but because of it. And in describing the evidence for this singularity at the beginning, he said, here is evidence, he said, for what can only be described as a supernatural event. There is no way this could have been predicted within the realm of physics as we know it. I have the footage of this, and I watched it later many times.
Those last few words, those are important. As we know it. If we can't explain something yet, then okay, I'm going to help someone away from the
I was
channel.
just curious. There's
You,
actually
you must be Christian J Edition to go there. So now go somewhere else.
what do you say?
It started with HIT, then a German flag, and then someone raising a hand.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
He must be a real Christian, right? Those are the real Christians who go there.
I found a paper in a journal I've honestly never heard of, but it's titled Negotiating the Boundaries of Science and Religion, the Conversion of Alan Sandage. Now, Peter, I want you to listen to this and then think about what Meyer just said, okay? So this paper says in the early 1950s, astronomer Alan Sandage inherited from Edwin Hubble the task of determining whether expansion was real. In the succeeding 40 years, Sandage established the discipline of observational cosmology. At the same time, he encountered the limits of science to address the full mystery of existence. In seeking an answer to the question of purpose, in particular, Sandage came to the abyss of reason and made a, quote, leap of faith. Now, does that sound like what Meyer said? where Meyer claimed that Alan Sandage became a Christian because of the evidence? Is that what does that sound like what he just said?
Mm-hmm.
Because it sounds like Meyer's doing what we like to call in the business a fat lie.
Yeah.
For anyone who's curious, I will link the paper here in the live chat. So it sounds like Sandage realized that science cannot explain purpose, which it can't, that science can't give you a purpose in life. And for that, he turned to religion, which, okay, that's fine. If that's what you want to do, then go ahead. I don't care. But like, come on. Saying that he became a Christian because he was shaped by the evidence is very clearly not what it looks like he said. Here you go. Here's another one. He speaks carefully here. So this is about Sandage. So Sandage speaks carefully here, almost apologetically, as if caught between a desire to share his sense of the mysterious and still maintain his stance as a hard-nosed scientist. From his point of view, it simply became less and less clear that all could have occurred without an ordering principle, and that ordering principle, I guess I call God, in order to give name to the mystery. So, okay, so yeah. At this point, one might conclude that at the depths of scientific understanding, religion and science somehow merged. The scientific quest seems fundamentally a religious one, as Einstein suggested. So all his religious references are contradicted by equally forceful denials that science has anything to do with religion. In fact, by his account, a stark boundary, between scientific and religious understanding emerges at the point where they seem to converge. So, okay, so all right. So he's looking into purpose and where science is not able to explain something about the world, that's where he invokes religion, it seems like. Here's the paper. There in the live chat. Feel free to read it. I'm not really impressed. I mean, cool. If that's what he wants to think, cool. But that just is not what Meyer said. So it's kind of like, that is actually very similar to what Newton did, though. Because if I remember correctly, Newton's theory, or Newton's physical laws explain the orbits of most of the planets except for like Mercury, right? And he just kind of had to admit, like, okay, well, maybe something else is going on, and I'll invoke God there to kind of supplant a scientific argument. And then, of course, Einstein came along later, and general relativity supplanted the need to invoke anything mysterious there to explain the orbits of the planets. So, like, it kind of sounds like something similar is going on there, but I digress. Anyway, okay, we can keep going.
He didn't seem too pleased to be saying this. It was a kind of gravity about him that he'd come reluctantly to this position. But I was 27 years old and kind of blown away. And there was a similar talk about the origin of life in between these two things. This ended up sparking in me a desire to study this more deeply. And it's the very thing that led me to this place a year later. And it's not hard to see why this is so troubling to a scientific materialist, because after all, the first words of the book of Genesis are, in the beginning, in the beginning. So whereas Dawkins has said the universe has precisely the properties we should expect, if there's no design, no purpose, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, in cosmology, it didn't turn out that way. Hasn't turned out that way.
Wait, pause
the universe
for a second.
we see is...
Wait, hold on. Those are completely different quotes, or these are quotes about completely different things. Dawkins is talking about the fact that the universe is entirely hostile to life. There's an extraordinarily tiny portion of the universe, and even still a tiny portion of this planet, on which life can exist, and in particular human life. And Dawkins is saying, because there is only a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the universe in which humans can live, that seems to be the exact sort of universe we would expect if there was no God to design it for us. What Meyer's been talking about is that there is an origin of the universe that has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of the universe that we can live in. Like, these things are in no way correlated with each other. This like what is he talking about here? What are we talking about? So anyway, okay, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Oh my God, did he just come back?
Yes, he came back on a sock account.
Oh, he came
And
back with a sock account.
yes.
Cool.
So that doesn't help if you're here, J edition. So go elsewhere.
Oh my gosh.
Not what we'd
And
expect if we had an eternal self-existent, if matter and energy were eternal, self-existent, self-creating. There was a beginning. They weren't around forever. And this whole idea of a beginning suggests the need for an external cause beyond the material universe. When I was on the Piers Morgan interview, the way I explained it, tried to get it across to a popular audience, was to say, before the origin of matter, there was no matter to do the causing. There had to be something outside of the material universe. Okay, second big discovery. Also, there's a Cambridge angle on this. One of the scientists who resisted the Big Bang Theory most vigorously was a man named Fred Hoyle. He said, very overtly, it smacks way too much of the Genesis account. He also said that he was a Democritean, which was an ancient Greek philosophy that said that atoms were the fundamental thing from which everything else came. And he said, I simply don't like to think about a cause that I cannot verify, was the way he put it. A cause beyond the physical
that's
universe.
fair.
He was also very opposed to religion early in his career, and he was quoted as saying, religion is but a desperate attempt to find an escape from the truly dreadful situation in which we find ourselves. Many people feel the need for some belief that gives them a sense of security, and no wonder that they become very angry with people like me who say this is all illusory, it's all an illusion.
Isn't that what Meyer does?
But Hoyle himself had a dramatic change of view. As an astrophysicist, he was trying to account for the formation of the heavy elements, in particular carbon and oxygen, which he knew were necessary to life. And there was a problem that physicists recognized as they thought about how the heavier elements might have gotten built up. If you remember your high school chemistry, remember the periodic table, and the lightest elements were helium and hydrogen and helium. And the idea that they came up with was that the protons and neutrons that make up those atoms would have been added one by one, and then you've gotten heavier and heavier and heavier elements. The rest of the periodic table would have been filled in. But the physicists working on this discovered a problem, and that was that if you add, say, to helium one more neutron or one more proton, that structure is unstable and it unravels really fast. And they called it the 5-nucleon crevasse. The nucleons just refer to protons and neutrons, the parts out of which atoms are made. So you can go from 1 to 2 and 2 to 4, okay, but if you add a fifth thing, it's not stable. So Hoyle was trying to figure this out.
So the point of this is that, like the universe, if you look at the distribution of elements throughout the universe, it's like hydrogen and helium are the two most abundant ones. And then the abundance drops way down for, was it lithium, boron, and beryllium? Is it lithium, then beryllium? Lithium? Hold on. Lithium is next. Table. Is it boron and then beryllium, or beryllium and then boron? Hold on. Beryllium, then boron. Okay, so lithium, beryllium, then boron have a really, really low small amount. It's a very small amount of them in the universe. And the reason is they are formed by the fractionation of larger atoms rather than the buildup of smaller ones. So like what he's saying here, for instance, is like you can put two hydrogens together, for instance, and get a helium, but you can't just smack helium and another hydrogen atom together to get lithium because it's unstable. It's just not going to happen. So instead, you have to get lithium, beryllium, and boron by taking larger atoms and then breaking those apart into smaller components, and then those can continue onward. So this is not unusual. Then basically from there, the distribution jumps way back up, and you have a lot of carbon, and then like the amount, the proportion within the universe goes down kind of linearly from there to nitrogen, then oxygen, then fluorine, neon, so on, so on. So it just kind of goes down from there. So anyway, sorry. Tangent over.
Scratching his head, and he finally came up with an idea. And the idea was, well, what if two heliums collided and made a beryllium, and then a beryllium and the helium collided, and that made a carbon? And basically, it sounds, if you're don't remember all this chemistry, it doesn't really matter. It's basically the idea of 2 plus 2 equals 4. That gets you to helium. 4 plus 4 equals 8. That gets you to a beryllium. And the 8 plus 4 gets you to 12. Voila, we have carbon, okay? But when he did all the nuclear physics on this, he discovered that the carbon that he would be produced that way had a higher energy level than the carbon we know today. And so he went out to Caltech and he got some physicists to do some tests to see if there were any carbons that wobbled, that had that what's called a resonance, that had that energy. And it turned out that the energy level he predicted did exactly exist. But that turned out to be was amazing. It was an amazing prediction. But it also raised a deeper question, because for carbon to form in the manner that he suggested, there had to be a whole lot of parameters of the universe that would be precisely finely tuned. Gravity would have to be really strong to overcome the forces of repulsion, electromagnetic forces of repulsion of those atoms inside stars. But the electromagnetic force would have to be exactly balanced to gravity. And the masses of those elementary particles had to be just so. And so there were all these what are called fine-tuning parameters that he discovered. We live in turns out, a Goldilocks universe, where the forces are not too strong, not too weak, where the speed of the expansion of the universe is not too slow, not too fast, where the masses of the elementary particles are not too heavy, not too light. Everything was just so.
Okay, so I'm gonna head this off because what he's about to do is make what's called the strong anthropic argument. There's the weak anthropic argument and the strong anthropic argument. The weak anthropic argument basically says that the universe exists in such a way that we are able to observe it, which, okay, that's just true. And then the anthropic principle, whatever you want to call it. Then the strong anthropic principle is that the universe exists or could only exist within a certain set of parameters that would allow for organisms to be able to live in it. Now, while the weak anthropic principle is obviously true, otherwise we wouldn't be here, the strong anthropic principle, we don't know. We can't know as of right now whether or not the universe could exist if these parameters were different. The only thing we do know, we can pretty well know, is that life as we know it wouldn't exist if the parameters were different. So if the strong and weak nuclear force, if the electromagnetic force, if gravity, if the strength of these forces were different, life, the universe itself would be different. How much different? Well, we don't really know. We can't really model it. How would you model it, right? You'd have to have like the most, insane supercomputer possible. All we can know is that things would be different than they are currently, and that's fine. Okay. And so there are different ways to think about it, right? Like, maybe there are some parameters that are that without life couldn't exist. That's possible, or that have to be within a certain range, but we just don't know what it is. And he's going to make the argument, of course, that because the parameters are the way that they are, that is necessary, and we just simply don't know that to be true. We don't know that to be the case. As far as I'm aware, this is again coming from a non-physics person, so if I'm getting it wrong, then please correct me. But that is my understanding. Yeah, that is my understanding. Okay.
That's the big take home if you didn't follow the chemistry bit. And so Hoyle then begins to think, well, what kind of a universe is this where all these parameters are just right? And there was another Cambridge physicist. Hoyle was here, by the way, from 1939 to 1972. He did all this work at Cambridge. And he just got it tested out at Caltech.
And he was an atheist, by the way.
There was another physicist here named John Polkinghorne. Both of them were later knighted, so Sir John. And he came up with a nifty little illustration to get this idea across. He called it his universe-creating machine. And he used to ask his students, in fact, he came and gave a talk to a student group that I was a part of, and he used this illustration. And he said, imagine you're on a spaceship, and you go out into outer space, and you dock at a space station, and you get out for a little rest, and it turns out that, whoa, this is a really important space station, because inside this space station, there's a room, and in the room, there's this console, and the console is the actual machine by which the universe was created. He said, it's a thought experiment. He said, just go run with me for a minute. And so he says, you know, and he said, it would be like this. It would be like, there'd be all these possible values for the strength of gravity, but it's set just right. You click it one way, this way or that way, and the universe collapses back on itself. Force of expansion, that cosmological constant, same thing. The mass of the elementary particles, same thing. Everything is just right. So he has this little visual aid of a thought experiment, imagining a universe-creating machine where all the parameters are set just right. And he used to ask students, without answering the question, well, what do you make of that? And he just leave it to people to think about. Well, later I had a chance to interview him, and I said, well, Sir John, what do you make of that? And he said, well, I don't say that the atheists are stupid. I just say that theism provides a more satisfying explanation. And interestingly, that's exactly the position that Fred Hoyle came to.
Pause for a moment. So, by the way, John Polkinghorne is a theoretical physicist, also an Anglican priest. Just want to throw that out there. However, anyway, what he is saying here, I do take a bit of umbrage with that quote, because there's nothing wrong with potentially with like suggesting that the universe had like a creator god or something. Now that hypothesis doesn't really accord with the data, or at the very least, it's not. It can be it can accommodate the data, but it doesn't really make any predictions that are useful or interesting. But also, by what he said was, it provides him with or he said theism is more satisfactory to him as an explanation of that. Could be the case. Maybe that makes him feel better. Okay, well and good, but like that doesn't really tell us anything. Again, Fred Hoyle is an atheist, right? So this quote here, a common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. I'd be curious to know what the rest of that quote is, because I'm willing to bet it's something like, however, that's not what the data says, because again, he was an atheist. I mean, Fred Hoyle is famously an atheist. He was not a Christian. So this argument here doesn't, or this quote here is almost certainly a quote mine. I'm actually curious to see.
Also, he started off with planet Earth when he said all of the universal constants are just right. Has it occurred to him that pretty much all of the planets that we know of, for those planets, the universal constants are just wrong to have life? So is this intelligently designed that life isn't possible on pretty much the majority of planets? And is it then just right, or is it just wrong, or how do we see this?
Right.
It's the only thing they argue about.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like if you have a garden in which, I know I said I hate analogies, but hear me out. It's kind of like saying that you have a garden in which all of your flowers are dead except for one, and you can say, "Look at my beautiful garden" by pointing at this one flower. Like, okay. I mean, that's one way to put it, I guess.
I used to have a garden with a small pond in which I had koi carps. And so part of my garden was intelligently designed for life of the koi. It could thrive everywhere in my garden, and then it flooded. And so the kois all swam out of the pond, and then the land dried up, and I ended up with an empty pond because apparently my garden wasn't created to sustain koi life. Kind of weird.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up this quote to see if I can find like the origin of it, which is quite difficult apparently. I did find if there's someone asked, what do you think Hoyle meant by this quote? It says Hoyle was everyone. Okay, so these people are pointing out that Fred Hoyle was obviously an atheist, but okay, what is it from? What is this quote from? The universe, past and present reflections. Okay, can I access this? Is that possible? Oh, hello? Can I? Ah, Peter, I found it. I found the quote.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Let's see. Is that okay, so okay, I found the paper from which this says the universe, the past and present. Okay, so this quote does come at the very end of the paper. So this is like the last quote of the paper. Okay, so he's talking about this, basically the strong anthropic principle in this paper. So that's what this paper is talking about. This is like biology affecting the usual picture of terrestrial life knowledge to be amply confirmed by the facts. But this first resting point did not survive those early readings. It was quickly apparent. Okay, but this first resting point did not survive those early readings, as it was quickly apparent that the facts point overwhelmingly against life being of terrestrial origin. That's right, because Hoyle and Wickramasinghe were panspermia guys. Yeah, because comets must have experienced breakup and reformation with material interchange between them, and because the material would be organic in our view, it was possible to think of the whole ensemble of comets, many billions of them, as a life-generating unit. And because a few comets are breaking up and scattering their contents across all time, the process was not relegated to the remote past. This was a big plus mark, since theories that relate to current events stand, in my view, above those that are concerned only with situations that are long dead and done with. There was therefore much of interest to be worked through in this first shift from the Earth to comets, and the investigation of a number of side issues deluded us for a while into thinking that the main problem, the origin of life, had been faced. The proteins, the explicit ordering, acids and downstream properties. Organs we can give. Sorry, I'm just quickly going through this right now. So he is still, he's of course still arguing that life did form naturally, that there was not, that life was not formed by an intelligence. Apart from the observations, this precise size is remarkable. In calculating the fogging effect that would be produced by the normal size distribution of bacteria and degradation products, the correspondence to observations is remarkable. Unlike the complex and unsatisfactory calculations we made in the 1960s, obtained an almost perfect result in only a couple of days. if grains aren't organic with connections to living cells, it would certainly be incorrigibly malicious to have given us this excellent result with the wrong theory, coming after a long history of poor results with the right theory. Okay, so basically, this whole thing is him arguing for panspermia, is a large part of it. So he's basically arguing that organic molecules formed elsewhere in the universe then formed the life on Earth. So interesting. Okay.
That's strange because wouldn't that go against the Bible then?
Yeah, it kind of would. Yeah, so not quite what Meyer was arguing. It seemed better to suppose that the origin of life are better. I mean, less likely to be wrong. Suppose a spaceship approaches Earth. Okay. Okay. What we call the divine force of nature. Sorry, I'm still reading. Such a project would be quite beyond our practical applicability, not beyond comprehension. We are near to understanding would be involved in dog is understanding the construction of a power station. Don't be bowled over. In surprise, finding that a living cell is a feasible construct. Would you not say to yourself whenever language super calculating intellects use? Other molecular relation. If you want to produce carbon, oxygen, there are just two. And you're fixing. Is that another put up artificial job? A common sense interpretation of the physics. The numbers, one calculation, is actually overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. That is very odd. So, okay, so he talks about. So this article is first about what the nature of nebula are, the nature or is what the nature of nebula is, and he talks about nebula, and he talks about how life likely formed as a result of the nebula, and then he rounds it out here. I'll put it again here in the side chat so everybody can read it for yourselves. There you go. And then he rounds it out by saying that it is unlikely that wasn't it even more ridiculous to suppose that the vastly more complicated systems of biology had been obtained by throwing chemicals at random into a wildly chaotic astronomical stew pot. By far the simplest way to arrive at the correct sequences of amino acids and the enzymes would be by thought, not by random processes. And given a knowledge of the appropriate ordering of amino acids, it would need only a slightly superhuman chemist to construct the enzyme with 100% accuracy. This is an odd paper. It is, however, it is not a. This is an odd paper. It is also worth pointing out that Fred Hoyle was also opposed to a lot of stuff in evolution. He was opposed to Archaeopteryx being a transitional fossil between reptiles and birds. I don't know. Yeah, he thought that Archaeopteryx was a man-made fake. That's what it was. I don't know. It is a weird paper. It is, however, just a okay, I think what he's arguing. Okay. I think what he's arguing here is that it is impossible for life on Earth to have originated without quote superhuman intellect. That's what it seems to me. So he's saying it is most likely that panspermia is responsible for life on Earth. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here, for instance, I don't know. This is so weird. Okay, so here's from his Wikipedia page. Published in his 1982/1994 books, Evolution from Space, Hoyle calculated that the chance of obtaining the required set of enzymes for even the simplest living cell without panspermia was 1 in 10 to the 40,000th. Since the number of atoms in the known universe is infinitesimally tiny by comparison, 10 to the 80th, or 10 to the 10 raised to the power of 80. That's what I should say. So it's 1 in 10 raised to the power of 40,000. And the number of atoms in the universe is infinitesimally tiny by comparison, and 10 raised to the power of 80. He argued that Earth as life's place of origin could be ruled out. He claimed the notion that not only the biopolymer, but the operating program of a living cell could be arrived at by chance in a primordial organic soup here on Earth is evidently nonsense of a high order. Though Hoyle declared himself an atheist, this apparent suggestion of a guiding hand led him to conclude that a superintellect is monkey with the physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. He would go on to compare the random emergence of even the simplest cell without panspermia to the likelihood that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747. I don't know. This guy seems to have some... He seems to have some contradictory beliefs going on here. Yeah, I mean, this is from 1981, but yeah, these he seems to be holding some contradictory beliefs here, is what it seems like. Okay, I'm sorry, I've wasted way too much time with that. We can keep going.
He said, a common sense interpretation of the data, the fine-tuning data, suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry to make life possible. And so he shifted from this really strident form of atheism to a belief in intelligent design and a kind of rudimentary theistic belief as a result of, again, these discoveries that he had made here in Cambridge. Now, maybe the most exciting of all the discovery stories for Cambridge is the Watson and Crick story, and the whole story of what's called the molecular biological revolution. And this is the third big discovery that I talk about that's not compatible with the scientific materialism of Richard Dawkins. The fine-tuning isn't, by the way, as well. It's not a property you would expect if you were trying to explain the universe by reference to blind, pitiless indifference. The go-to atheistic explanation now is that there's a gabillion other universes out there, and we just happen to be in the lucky one where all the fine-tuning parameters got just right.
Well, that is one hypothesis.
We can talk about that in the Q&A if you like. In any case, the big discovery, perhaps the most famous of all the discoveries with God-friendly implications, was the discovery of DNA, and not just the structure of DNA, which was first discovered here in 1953, but also the discovery that DNA contains digital information in an alphabetic or digital form. The discovery was first made by Watson and Crick. The elucidation of the DNA structure was first made by Watson and Crick in 1953, and their famous model involved what was called a sugar phosphate backbone, and then what were called bases that were carrying information along the inside of the molecule. On February 28th, 1953, they walked into a pub, the Eagle Pub. Some of us have been talking about going there and having a pint to celebrate. This was also the watering hole of William Wilberforce, by the way. And it's just steps away from that Cavendish door, which I think is lovely, because inside the Cavendish laboratory, you can look in the window where Watson and Crick were doing their modeling. And so if you find the door, look in the window to the right, and you'll see where they were working out the structure of the DNA molecule. The day they figured it out and all the pieces clicked into place, Crick stood back and said, "It's so beautiful, it's got to be right." And so they walked down the street just a few hundred steps to the Eagle Pub and announced to the people there drinking that they had discovered the secret of life. I don't know if it was drinks on the house or not, but it was quite.
Now, I wonder. I'm not buying his book. I'm not giving him money, but I do wonder if he mentions the work that Rosalind Franklin did and basically how Maurice Wilkins stole their work and then passed it along to Francis and Crick. I am curious about that. I don't know if Meyer is the type to give credit to the women in the background. Um, but I do wonder about that because that like they didn't figure it out on their own. They basically had to get the was it like the X-ray crystallography or whatever from Maurice Wilkins, who worked with Rosalind Franklin, and he passed those along. That's why the three of them shared the Nobel Prize. She died later of cancer, and they shared the Nobel Prize, and it wasn't even awarded posthumously to her. Just wasn't awarded at all to her. So I am curious. I'm curious about that. But anyway, okay.
Quite an atmosphere. And today, right outside the pub, you'll see a plaque, and you can see that if you go on the, these pictures are in your self-guided walking tour. Now, I think an even more significant discovery was made by Francis Crick 5 years later. In 1958, he formulated something called the sequence hypothesis. And what he realized was that along the interior of that twisting double helix were chemical subunits of the molecule that were functioning like alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters, zeros and ones in a section of machine code. You may know that Bill Gates has said the DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever written. It's a pretty suggestive remark. We'll come back to that.
Biologist
And
Bill
Crick
Gates
was the first to realize
right.
that DNA is containing information in a digital form. And what he thought the information was doing was providing instructions for building the big protein molecules that are crucial to keeping living cells alive. You may have seen some of my visual aids on this, but proteins are made of smaller subunits called amino acids. And if they're arranged just right, then the forces between them will cause these long chain-like molecules to fold into very specific shapes. And then those shapes will perform, if the shapes are right, then they have a hand-in-glove fit with other molecules in the cell, and then they'll do a job. And they do lots of jobs. They do all the important jobs. You can think of proteins as like the toolbox of the cell. Just as in the toolbox we have a hammer and a wrench and a saw, and they do jobs in virtue of their three-dimensional shape and structure. Well, the same thing is true in the proteins. Some of them catalyze reactions. Some of them express the information on DNA. Others of them form the parts of miniature machines that cells need to stay alive. So there's all this intricate machinery in cells, and it's all made from the machine.
just reminds me, because I do a lot of stuff with tools as well, just because I like working with my hands. So everything in your toolbox is a hammer, if you wanted to. just saying. I don't know why.
Hey, when everything looks like a nail, or when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Isn't that the
yeah,
quote?
that too. But you can use everything in your toolbox as a hammer. And there are people on YouTube who are complaining about power drills, especially the new ones, the cordless ones, that you can't use those as a hammer. It's because it's not a hammer. I mean, damn. Never mind.
Genes are made of the proteins, and the proteins are constructed as a result of the information on the DNA molecule. So a good analogy would be something like...
I have to say it. I do like it that he's better at arts and crafts, making his necklace there, than he is at being honest.
Are people familiar with digital printers? Are you familiar with those? The way now we can use digital code, and the printers will print. They don't print out paper. They print out, pieces of garage doors or physical objects that do things. Or engineers here will be familiar with the CAD/CAM technology, computer-assisted design and engineering. In Seattle, we have Boeing, and at Boeing, the engineers will write code. The code will go down a wire, it will be converted into another machine language that can be read at a manufacturing apparatus, and then the manufacturing apparatus will put for example, the rivets on the airplane wing in just the right place, in accord with the specifications of the code written by the engineer. So we do this all the time now. We have digital information directing the construction of mechanical parts and systems. That's what's going on inside cells. And that's what Crick first realized, and it was later confirmed by a whole series of really fascinating experiments. Now, one of the other scientists who was here at Cambridge was the guy who figured out what the proteins were doing. And so you have the DNA guys and the protein guys right here at the same time figuring it all out. And now there's a laboratory and the guy, one of the key guys here was named Max Perutz. He got the Nobel Prize in 1962 for his work on protein structure. Watson and Crick got their Nobel Prize about the same time. And they now, this period of immense scientific creativity, which is almost all happening here, although Rockefeller Institute got into it, some people in France as well, but it's an amazing story, how they uncracked this. What's really fun is that Francis Crick was a code breaker in World War II, and he ended up breaking the ultimate code. The irony is that Crick and Watson were also strict scientific materialists. They were atheists, and they were looking for the material basis for life.
Hey, Peter,
and they thought they found it.
Peter, did you know it's funny that neither of those guys became theists as a result of this discovery?
That's
Isn't that interesting?
one of the things that always wondered me.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Also, I'm not good at all of this, but I have been told that the DNA code is not Turing complete, so it's not considered to be a real code.
Yeah.
Also, the information in DNA is caused by mutations, is it not?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
The information in DNA that is caused by mutations.
Well, I think he would argue that the information is, well, I mean, because the term the genetic code refers to the ability of a codon to give rise or to correspond with an amino acid, and he might argue there's something metaphysical going on there, but we don't have any evidence to indicate that that's true. So,
yeah, but
RJ also put in the side chat. Do it.
Isn't the source of new information? Isn't that the mutative process?
The source of new information, yes.
Yes. So.
Also, RJ put in the side chat. Hoyle did a longer technical version in 1982 of the paper I was going through. And I'm kind of skimming it. It's see, listen to the. I don't know. The things that he says are very, very confusing to me. So one of the things he's saying is, I have always thought it curious that while most scientists claim to eschew religion, it actually dominates their thoughts more than it does the clergy. The passionate frenzy with which the Big Bang cosmology is clutched to the corporate scientific bosom evidently arises from a deep-rooted attachment to the first page of Genesis, religious fundamentalism at its strongest. So he's saying that the scientists who think that the universe had a beginning with the Big Bang, that those scientists are basically pushing a religious narrative, which is just fascinating.
Well, in all fairness, if the universe turned out not to have had a beginning, then they're in trouble, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Anyway, I'll have to read this. I'll probably read this paper later, but this is just he just has such interesting. He's an odd guy. He's kind of odd. He has a series of strange beliefs that he holds kind of simultaneously. But anyway, okay, we can keep going.
in 1953 until Crick realized it's not just a molecule, it's a molecule that contains code. And that discovery ends up being foundational. It provides evidence of what we're going to call intelligent design. And it's created a complete impasse in evolutionary theory. People cannot account for the origin of the information needed to build the first life or subsequent forms of life. I don't know if Doug is here in the room. We'll hear a little bit later in the week from Doug. He's another great Cambridge scientist, and I don't say that just because he's my friend. He did an amazing bit of work here for 14 years, and he interacted with...
No, he's saying that because he agrees with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a friend or a great scientist.
Doug what? He just said Doug. Evolution News. Hold on. Let me see if I can... Can I figure out who this Doug character is? Because I'm curious if it will... Do we know who this guy is? Is this Douglas Murray? Is that who that is? Or, oh, wait, it's probably Douglas Axe. It's probably who it is. That's probably Douglas Axe. And he's probably going to do the song and dance about, oh, I proved that the proteins that work are like one in well, it's like 1 every 10 to the 172nd or whatever. It's very stupid. Yeah, I think it's Douglas Axe. Yeah. That's possible, Vadim. That Hoyle is attacking that idea. That is certainly possible. I don't know. I would have to read this. I don't know a whole lot about Hoyle. I know that he came up with the tornado in a junkyard. I know that he claimed that Archaeopteryx was a fake. And that what else was it? Oh, that he's like, panspermia is definitely the way that life formed. But I don't, I'm not. Maybe I'll read this paper and see if I can understand what he's getting at, because I'm very confused by the positions he's taking. I don't know. It's very odd. Anyway. We can keep going.
With Max Perutz. He was in the laboratory that Watson, Crick, and Perutz and others founded, called the Laboratory for Molecular Biology, right here. So we'll hear a bit more of Doug's story later in the week. But in any case, even though Watson and Crick were looking for the material foundation for life, what they actually found was something more like software. And Bill Gates has said that DNA is like a computer program, but far more advanced than any we've ever created. And this is where sort of this part of the story intersects with my story. I attended this conference that I mentioned in Dallas in 1985. I heard the cosmologists talking about the evidence for a creation event, but I also heard scientists talking about the question of the origin of life and how the new discoveries in molecular biology about the information-bearing properties of DNA had completely changed the terms of debate. Turns out, by the mid-'80s, no one could understand where this information had come from. That was the thing they couldn't explain. If you want to explain the origin of the first life from simpler, non-living chemicals, well, that's all great. You can imagine the chemicals knocking into each other, but how are undirected chemical reactions going to get you code? That didn't seem very plausible. And one of the scientists at this conference had just written a book called The Mystery of Life's Origin, and in the epilogue to that book, he suggested that the information that was proving so perplexing to everyone trying to explain the origin of life was not evidence of an undirected chemical process, but rather possibly the product of what he called an intelligent cause. And this was Dr. Charles Thaxton, who is...
Possibly.
Okay, first of all, I've never heard of that guy before, but...
Possibly.
But I've never heard of that guy before, but again, this was like 50 years ago. And also, what Stephen Meyer does not like you to know is that actually random mutations can result and do result often in information. They do not want you to know that. What Meyer wants you to think is that a protein or a gene sequence has to be perfect or else it doesn't work at all. And he writes about that constantly. He's written numerous papers about it. He wrote about it in his book Signature in the Cell. And yet there are numerous experiments that show mutations, as Peter mentioned, mutations do change or add informational content. Creationists like Meyer don't like that fact. They would they would or prefer you don't know it. And so at the end of the day, what he's doing is he's accommodating. These are accommodations that he's making within his worldview. His worldview does not predict these things, and he has to ignore a lot of things that we do actually observe in the real world to make these things fit. So what he's doing is very slimy and dishonest, but it's very much par of the course for a creationist like himself. So Thaxton is also a creationist? Okay, cool. All right. So, surprise. Surprise. Oh. All right, we can keep going. We'll do like one more and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
In Dallas. And his reasoning was very straightforward. He said, in our experience, information is a mind product. Software comes from programmers, after all. So maybe we've been working for 2 decades trying to explain the origin of the information in DNA as a result of chemical reactions, and the chemistry doesn't want to do that. The chemistry, as Jim Tour, you may have seen him online, says, chemistry doesn't care about life. It doesn't want to move in a life-friendly direction. And so Thaxton suggested, well, maybe what we're seeing is evidence of an intelligent cause. Well, I attended the conference. Friends introduced me afterwards, and I started going to his office late at night. And over the ensuing year, I received some very, very consequential mentoring. And by the time I got to applying for a Rotary Scholarship to come to Cambridge, I already knew what I wanted to work on. I wanted to work on this origin of life question, specifically with wondering whether there might be evidence of actual intelligent design. Was it possible, I was wondering, that you could formulate a scientific theory or scientific argument for intelligent design?
By the way.
Now, arguably, the person that helped me think this through most was another Cambridge person, again, Charles Darwin. And even though I disagreed with his theory about the origin of new forms of life, he had developed a method of reasoning that directly applied to this origin question. It was a method of historical scientific reasoning. Rather than sitting at the laboratory bench and trying to get some process to occur under controlled laboratory conditions, what historical scientists try to do is look at clues and reason back to what might have caused those clues to emerge. My PhD thesis ended up being called Of Clues and Causes. And so how do you get from the clues back to the causes? And Darwin said, well, there's a way. What you want to do is you want to infer the best explanation. We don't get to see what happened, but we know something about cause and effect, and so we can figure out what is the most likely cause of a given effect that we're looking at in the present if we know how cause and effect works. And while I was working at that, there was a young professor from the United States who came to do a job talk here to candidate for a position in my department, the Department of Philosophy of Science here at Cambridge. He ended up getting the job, and he left behind a manuscript for me called Inference to the Best Explanation. And he later came and actually rose to become the head of the department. And Peter Lipton was his name, and what he highlighted was a question philosophers were asking. Yes, we see the scientists are doing this inferring to the best explanation method, but what makes an explanation best? And as I got deeper into his work and some of the work of the 19th century philosophers and scientists, I found a consensus was actually already present, that the best explanation is the one that posits a cause which is known to produce the effect in question. I found this in the work of William Whewell, for whom we are naming our center, and also in the work of Charles Lyell.
I see that we're right on the time. I just want to point out almost every single citation of Myers's paper is by creationists. Every single one of them. I can't read some of these because they're in other languages.
How surprising.
I know. So surprising. I would love to read this. I can't access it. It's not accessible online, it looks like. Oh, that's really frustrating. Um, I would love to be able to. Oh, wait. Hold on. Nope, sorry. These is not available on this repository until the author makes it public. Ah, it's really frustrating. Dang. Ah, I would love to be able to read this. I actually wonder. I wonder. Dang it. Hmm.
Can I answer the question of what makes an explanation best?
Shoot.
If everything that you propose in said explanation is proven to actually exist.
True. Ah,
So
man, I would love to be able to see this. Ah, that's very frustrating. Suffice it to say, his paper never really amounted to anything, and it seems like it had no effect on um, origin of life studies at all. Dang, I would love to be able to see what he says. Oh well. Oh well, tragic. But I would love to be able to read that. Well, it is 9 o'clock now, so Um, so okay, so far, what or in this episode, Meyer went through his lines of evidence for why the God hypothesis has returned. He cited that the universe had an origin, the Big Bang, or that at the very least expansion had an origin. That he cited the strong anthropic principle, and he has now cited that DNA is a code.
mhm.
I mean, none of these are new. Um, these are tired apologetic arguments that have been around for decades at this point. So it's very funny to me that his book is about using these lines of data that have been known for a very long time. I mean, as he said, we've known that the universal expansion has been a thing since what, the 20s or 30s, 1920s or 30s. We have known about the structure of DNA since the 1950s. So like he's not breaking new ground here.
No.
These are all old arguments. These are arguments you could get on a chick track. These are arguments you could get from Ray Comfort or Eric Hovind or Ken Hovind or anybody else. These are not new arguments. It's kind of sad, honestly. I was really hoping that he would have something new that we could sink our teeth into, but he doesn't. He has the same old arguments we have heard time and time again.
Wait, you
Tragic.
expected an ID proponent to come up with something new. That's what you said.
I was hopeful. I was hopeful, but my hopes were much like the young Canaanites were dashed against the rocks.
I'm a very
So
simple guy, Jackson. If he had come up with something new, it would have been on the news worldwide.
that's probably true.
And it hasn't been.
I do also want to. That's true. I do want to point out, for anyone who has not heard, so one piece of news before we sign off. The paleontologist who worked for the Discovery Institute, a guy named Gunter Beckley, passed away this week. He was in a terrible car accident and died. And so I've written, or I co-wrote the Professor Dave scripts about Beckley, as well as the one about Meyer. You should go watch all of those; they're all very good. And then, of course, RJ and I will be writing about him in Rocks Volume 2. But just so you're aware, he just passed away. So very sad.
That is sad.
So anyway, okay.
Meanwhile, I have done a little bit of research myself. Mr. J Edition in the chat. He's consistent. He has more than one channel, all of which have one subscriber per 2 videos that he posted. And
Probably his mom. Yeah.
Weird enough. So he's not. His name is not J Edition. His name is Dave Bryce because he was silly enough to post his real name on one of his channels. So I will be emailing him and asking him what the hell is going on in the chat. So,
Ruh-roh. We hate when that happens.
Not smart, Dave Bryce.
Not very smart. All right. Well, thank you, Peter, for being here and for doing the show.
Anytime.
And thank you, everybody in the live chat, for watching us today. And I have written the Rotifer's Tale. I just finished the Barnacle's Tale, and I'm waiting for Nestle to come back from vacation so he can look over the Rotifer's Tale, and then we'll have that one out pretty soon. So there you go. RJ's already looked it over. So anyway, all right. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see all of you next time. So bye, everybody.
See you later. Bye-bye.